Joining us today is Michelle Cotterman from the Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom, or OAMF. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Now, Ms. Cotterman, can you tell us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. So Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom is a nonpartisan grassroots organization, and we are dedicated to preserving an individual's right to freely accept or decline interventions, whether it's therapeutic, preventative, or diagnostic, and that includes vaccinations.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about how your organization got started, what its mission statements are, its objectives, and the funding for it's an NGO, right?
Yeah, non-government organization. We are completely grassroots, so all of our funds come from individual members of our community. Nobody within the organization is paid to do any of the work that they do. It's all based on voluntary passion and commitment towards preserving medical freedom. Right now, we are seeing this totalitarian tiptoe into mandates where people aren't going to have a choice any longer what's injected into their bodies. So the forming of Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom started in 2015 as the mandates came in for healthcare workers in the hospital settings, forced flu shots. So every year, thousands of Ohio workers and across the nation are being given a choice. Either you accept a flu shot or you're fired. Some organizations are more lenient and allow exemptions, but others, they are just completely strict. No excuses, no choice, nothing. We even have members who have had their medical exemptions declined from their own personal physicians by the Hospital Review Board. So we have corporate policies now interfering with doctor-patient relationships. So OAMF was founded on that particular principle, forced flu shots.
And what is your position with OAMF?
Right. So I am a registered nurse. I love being a nurse. I love working with my patients. Education is one of my most treasured job performances. I love educating people and providing them with, information about their treatment options and their informed consent. But Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom is a very dynamic group because we have so many medical professionals that are on board with us. So we have doctors, chiropractors, a lot of nurses, we have physical therapists, we have just a lot of people that are on board with us that are helping to educate legislators and educate the community. So it's really quite a dynamic group that we have. I work with our legislative action group, so we are responsible for setting up appointments with our state representatives and state senators and going downtown and educating them on the topics surrounding vaccination mandates, informed consent, and how they violate our human and civil rights.
Now, currently your organization has some legislation that has been introduced. Can you tell us what's in it, what's in the legislation, what will it do, why it's important?
Sure. So House Bill 193 is literally a one-page bill, and the principle of it is that it will prevent overreaching corporate policies and put medical decision-making back into the hands of the individual where it has always belonged. So it basically essentially gives exemption rights to adults in the workplace, not just hospital healthcare workers, but everyone. So if these policies start to creep out into the rest of the public domain and corporations, it's going to protect everyone and give them legal basis to exempt, whether it's philosophical or reason of conscience, religious or medical exemptions. That's it. That's the fundamental of the bill. Freedom.
Well, that's fantastic, and it's a little refreshing to hear that the bill is only one page long. Typically, when we see legislation introduced, it's written. It's a stack of
Yeah.
It's like a book, and
all legalese.
Yes.
It's very confusing and difficult to read through it and sometimes digest and understand what they're saying. But House Bill 193 is a very simple, straightforward piece of legislation, and it is just founded in freedom, free informed consent for the medical consumer, and that includes our healthcare workers and private citizens.
Now, it's my understanding that 13 other states have already passed similar legislation. Can you name off a couple of the states for us and tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I can't think off the top of my head. I know that of all places, California is one of them, Colorado, Maine. Maine is actually the only state that has all three exemptions written in. Most of the states are just covering religious and medical. But in Maine, they're covering reason of conscience, religious, and medical exemptions. And what's interesting to me is if you get onto the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and look at their quality measure and assurances, you're doing a hospital compare. Maine isn't having any problems keeping up with their healthcare worker vaccination rates from other states that don't have these laws. So it's clear that it's a minority of people who are going to decline these products, and it's not going to cause the flu apocalypse. It's not going to cause, mass grave sites and these states that are allowing freedom and reinforcing that with law. So most people are voluntarily accepting. These kinds of laws are put in place for the minority who perhaps don't want to accept a product like that.
So what is the current status of OAMF's legislation right now?
Well, this is our second session. The first session we had no movement with it at all. There were several hearings, but it didn't move. So this legislative section, we had about 3 hearings, and then we got it passed through the Economic Development, Commerce, and Labor Committee. And then the Speaker of the House decided to re-refer it to the Health Committee. And that happened in the summer of 2017. It's been sitting there. It has had no hearings since being referred. And we've tried all manner of methods trying to get it to move, and we haven't had any hearings in the Health Committee yet. So we'll see what happens going forward.
So basically what you're saying is that the Speaker of the House is, he put the legislation basically in a dark corner somewhere. They're kind of sitting on it right now.
They are sitting on this piece of legislation. And what's interesting is that he put it in the Health Committee, and yes, it's about a flu shot, but the chairman of that committee is a medical doctor, and he has affiliations with hospitals. And one of our major opponents to this bill is the Ohio Hospital Association. So as we see this as a conflict of interest, we're being told it's not, because there's not a direct conflict of interest there, even though, he's under pressure because he has these hospital affiliations, and they're saying, no, we don't want this bill.
So tell us, if you can, if you feel comfortable with it, tell us who the Speaker of the House is and who this gentleman who's sitting on the committee is. And do they have a close relationship?
I'm not sure how close their relationship is, but based on my crash course and the way the government runs, there are a few people within the legislature that will decide which bills do and don't move. And that comes down to leadership. So we have several members within our House of Representatives who are in the leadership. And then on the Senate side, there's even less. There's maybe 3 or 4. And they're the ones who are moving and shaking these bills. So the Speaker of the House is Cliff Rosenberger, and we haven't been able to get a meeting with him. We've tried to set up a meeting with his office, and we've gotten nowhere with that. As far as the chairman of the committee goes, it's Representative Huffman, Stephen Huffman. And again, he's a medical doctor, and so he has affiliations with the hospitals. We've met with him. He told us back in the fall of 2017 that he was going to give this bill due diligence. These are his words, due diligence. It will be allowed a sponsor testimony, opponent, and proponent testimony. It's been several months and no motion. He has not kept his word to us at that meeting. So one of the things that we're focusing on right now is building relationships within the members of our state legislature and trying to form positive relationships there and providing them with accurate, scientific, factual information that is supporting, our points and where we're coming from, as well as helping them understand how this is a violation of an individual's autonomy, their human rights, their civil rights. Forced medicine and forced injections, that's a big deal. And, we decided during the Nuremberg trials after World War II that we weren't going to do that anymore. We decided that as the entire nation of the world that we were not going to do forced medicine anymore. And yet here we are in 2018, having people getting fired or being forced to take flu shots.
Well, so how did this mandate come about? Who were the ones who decided to affect this policy to where medical staff had to either take the flu shot or lose their job?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people would think that there was a medical reason for that, but the truth is that it's coming from Healthy People 2020, which is a government agenda to push vaccination onto the adult population. So their primary target was healthcare workers, and they set an arbitrary goal of 90% as a target rate. Then they went and associated that percentage with the star rating system through reimbursement for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So hospitals, if they don't get a particular vaccination rate, they get dinged from their reimbursement.
So what you're saying is that this sounds like a something that's being driven more by incentives rather than...
Yes, correct. It's not because of health. This is a business plan for the pharmaceutical industry. And in fact, if you track it all the way back to who was sitting on those boards when Healthy People was pushing through this particular agenda, Novartis and other pharmaceutical industries were on those boards.
So in Ohio, is there any sort of nurses association there? And if so, what is their take on this policy of mandatory vaccines for medical employees?
We have an Ohio Nurses Association, and their policy actually is for voluntary vaccination policies within the workplace. They also don't believe in scarlet letters. So that would be unvaccinated nurses who got, or doctors who got exemptions not wearing a mask. So like right now, if it's a corporation that allows exemptions, if you're one of the few to get an exemption, you're forced to wear a mask from the time you walk in to the time that you leave. Most nurses and doctors are working 12-plus-hour shifts. That's a long time to have a mask on. And yet their vaccinated peers are not being held to that same standard. So they consider that a scarlet letter. It's identifying you in some way, shape, or form, and they're against that as well. However, they won't get behind and support this bill because anyone who pushes back against that industry, they find themselves, sinking to the bottom very fast. They don't get the support. They're not getting the funds coming in any longer. So while they have this voluntary policy, they will not support House Bill 193 for that reason, officially.
Okay. So you mentioned a couple times previously, briefly, about certain exemptions. Can you tell us, what exemptions, if any, are being recognized in light of this mandatory vaccine policy, and whether it's provided by a doctor, or if it's a religious exemption, or, for example, if a nurse is pregnant? I mean, how does this mandatory policy affect that?
Yeah, it depends on the corporation. Again, some of them are more lenient, so they may have written into their policy that they will allow you to have a religious exemption. They may even have medical exemptions written into the policy. However, that's you have to go through a process in order to get that approved. Some people get it approved, some people don't. We've had pregnant nurses who have had exemptions written by their OBGYNs that they should not get this vaccination, and yet they're still being forced into getting the flu shot. We had a physician who came in to testify in opposition of our bill, and he was bragging to the committee about how he had convinced 5 pregnant women in his hospital to take the flu shot despite their personal OB's recommendation not to get it. And then he went on to say that 2 of them actually ended up getting fired because they still continued to refuse. And he was testifying in opposition of the bill, but I think he actually did more harm than good because he reinforced all of the reasons we had said the previous week why we needed the protection from these policies.
Sure. And from my understanding, OAMF is not anti-vax. It's more based on informed consent. Can you clarify the difference and clarify that for our viewers?
Sure. So anti-vaccine would be organizations that want to see vaccine abolition. They want them to go away completely. They don't think anyone should get vaccinations because they feel like it's poisoning the body. Our organization is pro-informed consent. That means having the legal right, the free right to accept or decline a product. So if somebody wants to take a flu shot, we would support them in that decision. If somebody doesn't want to take a flu shot, we support them in that decision. But it's all about information. And a lot of times people are not getting accurate information in order to make a decision, based on information. We definitely want people to be able to make that decision for themselves.
And not have it dictated to them or
Correct.
have their jobs held over their head, which, in my opinion, that is a form of blackmail.
Right. That is no longer informed consent. It's coerced consent.
Right. Right. Well, a couple last questions here. If you could, you've touched on some of the obstacles that your organization has faced, but if there's anything else you'd like to say about certain obstacles that you guys may have faced, and then also I'd like for you to tell our viewers where can they go to find out more, if they are in Ohio, or maybe some action that they can get involved in if they're not in Ohio, if they're in their own state.
Sure. I think probably one of the biggest obstacles that we've had, and one of the arguments that we have the hardest time with, is Ohio is more of a conservative state. And our legislators don't want to get involved in private industry, and they don't really want to get involved in individuals' business either. So what House Bill 193 makes them do is to decide which one is more important to them. Because if they vote in favor of House Bill 193, they're interfering with private industry and their ability to set policy. And if they vote against House Bill 193, now they're allowing an industry to trample on an individual's rights to free informed consent. So that's probably one of the biggest obstacles and arguments that we have, is trying to figure out how to talk to these representatives who may be feeling that way and help them understand why, even if they're not telling them what they have to do, they're just saying you need to provide some type of reasonable alternative for people other than firing them if they don't want to accept this product. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have. The other one is that we have the Ohio Hospital Association against us. Well, they get a lot of their funding from the pharmaceutical industry. We have the Ohio Chamber of Commerce that's against us. So it's all about business. The businesses don't want the government telling them what to do. And we have the Ohio chapter of American Academy of Pediatrics against us. We have the Ohio State Medical Association against us. So we have a lot of interests that are pushing back against freedom. Can you imagine? They're anti-freedom. They are anti-choice. They want people to be forced medical procedures onto them. So we have this very powerful conglomerate of organizations that are pushing back against our bill, when this is truly about grassroots. This is about a bill by the people and for the people. Our organization is completely 100% volunteer basis. All of the money we get in come from donations from individual citizens. There's no corporate conglomerate that is supporting us in any way, shape, or form. It's all about getting back to the grassroots. Individuals supporting a message and coming together and pushing that message forward and trying to make a difference and allowing freedom back into people's lives.
Well, I think it's really admirable, the work that you guys are doing. You guys are dedicating your time. I mean, people still have to make a living and have families and everything like that, but also to do this in their own personal time to affect change for something that is essentially going against, like you said, the status quo of the establishment, whether it be the pharmaceutical industries, whether it be their connections with the government, whether it's federal or state and local. You did mention that there does sound to be several different conflicts of interest, which do not surprise me whatsoever. Through my research over the years, we have seen, and it's been well documented, the revolving doors that exists between the pharmaceutical industries and certain governmental regulation agencies. So definitely I'd like to direct everyone over to your website, OAMF. It's the Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom.org, and we will have a link for that in the show notes. And if there's anything else you'd like to convey to our viewers.
Sure. So I would just encourage all of your listeners and your viewers to seek out their own medical freedom and vaccine choice organizations in their own states. I know most of the states have them. They exist. So what they can do is, if this is important to them, contact those organizations, get involved, volunteer, make phone calls, write letters, sign up to get the action alerts, so that when there is a call to action, every voice matters in this fight, because it is literally a minority of people against pharmaceutical, medical, industrial complex. So this is the David and Goliath fight. If we don't speak up, if people don't start getting brave and joining hands and locking arms on this with their state organizations, mandates are going to sweep the country, and not just kids, but adults. Not just healthcare workers, but people who work in the restaurant industry, teachers, you name it. You work with the public, you're going to get forced vaccinations. That is what Healthy People 2020 is seeking to do. And if we don't speak up and get together and start, setting a precedent, I mean, it's going to be too late. So we need every single voice in this fight. So get with your state organizations. If you're in Ohio, you can go to our website. It's ohioamf.org, and you can click on the Join Us link, and you can sign up for our action alerts. If you want to donate to our organization, we always need the money. It helps us put out community educational events. So we've held events at the State House. We have an event coming up in May, on May 19th, where we're going to be focusing on maternal, fetal, and infant health. So helping provide people with information about, not only the dangers of vaccinations, but, the GMOs and all of the food-based stuff, and then what they can do to help raise a healthy child in spite of all of this toxic environment that we find ourselves in.
Well, I think that's pretty sound advice, people getting involved, getting active in their own communities. And as we have seen, 13 other states have passed very similar legislation, so it's not impossible to do. These are big, organizations that people are going up against, and they're having results. They're having good results. So that's a great sign. Thank you very much for your time today, Ms. Michelle Cotterman of Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.